Since this Liberal government has been in power in 2017, they have talked about a distinctive Indigenous housing strategy. In 2019, investing in more housing. We have yet to see these two items come into full action. Last month, I traveled to 7 Nunavut communities, visiting over 100 homes. All homes I went to had mold. Most of them were overcrowded. I also heard parents losing their children to the foster care system because their home was deemed unfit. I have heard stories of parents finding their children hanging from the ceiling. I have heard stories of elders forced to live with people that abuse them. The lack of basic human rights for Indigenous peoples results in death. Inuit are dying and have been before this pandemic. I did not have expectations of this throne speech, Mr. Speaker, because since the day I was born, Inuit have heard promises of a good life, of positivity, of being able to contribute it to society in a healthy way, to have basic human rights, and we continue to have those promises broken to us. I will start to have faith in the federal government, Mr. Speaker, once I see Inuit have the opportunity to live a life filled with dignity and respect. I will start to have faith in this institution once I see Indigenous people have the right to self-determination, Mr. Speaker. When will this federal government stand for Inuit and provide at least basic human rights, at least basic housing? Matna, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
What an incredible video. Wow, I'm speechless. With no further ado, I would like to introduce to you Member of Parliament, Mumilaaq Qaqqaq from Nunavut. Mumilaaq, I'm going to give you the floor. I thank you for taking the time in being on Future Prospects to speak about what you're doing, your position within Parliament, and the message for your community, and most importantly, for our future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. I really appreciate you having me here and giving us this space to have these really fun and really important discussions we'll be having. And you said my name perfectly. I think you are a little worried there for nothing. You said my name spot on. And maybe I'll just introduce myself a little bit. My name is Mumilaaq Qaqqaq. I'm 27 years old. I'm a New Democrat Party elected member of parliament in October of 2019. The youngest to be elected for Nunavut since it's been created. Also, my electoral riding is the biggest in the world. So there's some very unique things I think that we're going to get to be able to talk about. And I just want to say thank you again for giving me the space to do that.
My love, you are welcome anytime. You have a standing invite any single time. Thank you for that compliment about pronouncing your name correctly. Oh, my Lord. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to delve into this because I don't want to miss a minute of it. When we met, I sent out an invitation or an invite to you through Facebook. I don't know what it was, but it was quite a while ago. And when you responded and your assistant responded, I was so excited because your story is so powerful. It is incredible. If you can just tell the viewers who you are. You've talked about your position, but where you were born, you've got an incredible story, and it really embraces the story with what you're doing right now, please.
Definitely. I think a lot of people know me from that October 2019. I like talking about there's a lot of things that happened and a lot of skills that were developed and a lot of things that I learned before that. And there was no way I could have gotten to that point, with all those supports and my community behind me and my parents and my family, and being fortunate to have that. So I grew up in a community called Baker Lake. It's basically smack in the middle of Canada. If you actually go from the northern to the southern tip and the west to the east, and you look at the map right in the middle, Baker Lake is very close to that. It's a community when I was growing up of about 1,800, and that's increased to about 2,000. I grew up playing a lot of soccer, hockey. I did a lot of volunteering, coaching, fundraising. I did a lot of other things. I did speech in Skills Canada. I went to Raven Basic Military Training Program, which I did not last and was not for me, but I did try it. I've traveled to Africa, among a number of other places. I've traveled a lot of places throughout Canada, and there's a whole bunch of other things that I did prior. In terms of work and that kind of stuff, I graduated in 2011. It's been mostly focused around Inuit employment and Inuit rights and fulfilling that land claims agreement. And how do we ensure that at the national and especially at a federal level, that these clear laws, these clear obligations are being fulfilled? So in a number of different organizations, I tried to work on increasing recruit, retain, retiring Inuit, and was a lot of the focus. So I'd worked in a number of all different kinds of. I worked for the government of Nunavut. I worked for Inuit Canada, or the National Inuit Advocacy Organization, Qaqqaq Energy Corporation, or the Territorial Power Corporation. I've substitute taught. I've worked as a dental therapist assistant. I've done so many things that have just given me not only the skills and abilities to do what I do, but the incredible amount of insight and understanding of what the issues and where can we try and break those cycles already are. I already had such an awareness of how those kinds of things worked. So that just launched me into being able to, I understand what our communities need. I understand what's not being fulfilled. I understand who is not fulfilling their obligations, and it's time that stops. So I was kind of thrown into the MP position, but I wasn't planning on this, and I really try and keep that. I really try and show people I'm just like other people. I just happen to have this platform, and I want to use it to the best of my ability.
I want to touch upon there's a couple of questions I want to ask you. Wow, your resume must be like this. Like, oh my Lord. Mumilaaq, there was something within our conversation you said, I am privileged. When you said I'm privileged, for you to take on the role like this with the massive responsibility at such a young age. I want to just jump onto something else before you answer that question. When you say thrown into the role, were people coming to you knowing that you would be a great advocacy? You're such a powerful voice. You speak very, very well. You've done public speaking.
Yeah, in my previous position, I had done a lot of I shouldn't say mostly, but I had done quite a bit of facilitation work. And right. I think at the time, this isn't fair to say right now, but at the time, I think they were kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel, so to speak, in terms of who can we find that we know fits that kind of has the same kind of beliefs and values as NDP and would be a good candidate. So it was one of the last days in August, right before the writ dropped, where I had a friend who was a part of the NDP EDA approach me, and I said, hold on. And I think it was a Saturday morning or something like that at my kitchen table. And I said, hold on, you're asking me to run so we're clear. And I used a lot more colorful language because I just wanted to ensure that I was hearing this right, that they wanted me to run, or that they wanted to know if I was interested in running for a member of parliament with the NDP. And at the time, I'm pretty sure I laughed for a bit. And then I said, oh, you're serious. Oh, all right. and we discussed some stuff, and I said, well, hold on, first off, let me talk to my mom. And then I was thrown into into the fire, so to speak, because within the next week we were campaigning, and it's never really stopped from there.
Wow. Oh my God. And you never look back.
No.
Why have you, okay, I'm going to ask you this now quickly. Why have you not looked back? What keeps you in the game? And there's a lot to your story, Mumilaaq, but I want to ask you that while we're still on the conversation.
My thing has always been trying to find my comfort and my balance in helping other people to the best of my ability. And that just happened to be running for MP. And a lot of the time that we often go through life and we say, more often than not, we miss and dwell on the opportunities that we don't take. So I knew I don't have kids, I don't have a mortgage. It was, hey, I am okay enough to survive 6 weeks because you're not working for 6 weeks, and then hopefully enough to scrape to come back after that. But it was basically, I didn't have anything to lose, and since being elected, I said, well, I knew what I was walking into, so this is what I need to do now. And that's just very much I can't look back. There's not much back there. We need to look forward.
That's right. You mentioned through our conversation before we go for break, you said to me, and I was going to ask you more on it through the pre-interview, you said, Mumilaaq, you said that I'm privileged. Why do you say you're privileged?
I think that the conversation around privilege in itself is already, it's something that is still something that we as human beings are not comfortable talking with. And I think that that's something super unfortunate because we all have different levels of privilege. It just, and what needs to be clear about that though, is that there is differences, and that when we talk about white privilege, even that's a completely separate conversation than privilege in education, privilege in health, privilege in, so I think, and I've thought about this a lot before. I think the higher, if you look at Canada, look at the map, and you say in your mind, the green areas are the places of privilege where you have opportunity for education. You're not worried about getting to a hospital if you have something broken or a cut. You're not worried about your child's opportunities growing up, about sports and things like that. You're not worried about having food on the table and having options for homes. So I think that when we talk about privilege, what we don't realize is that the bottom of Canada is a lot of green. There's a lot of those opportunities that everybody has the right to. And when you start moving up Canada, it starts to get into that orange and red where you see less education opportunities. You see less basic health care. I can't say just even basic health care, mental health resources. All these things are minimal, if not non-existent, if not culturally appropriate. So many things. And when I see Canada, I see you start hitting the middle and the north, and you start seeing a lot of things start to diminish in terms of basic human rights, basic resources, having access to opportunities. And it's something that isn't fair. With all that in mind, I was fortunate to, and this is nothing anyone should ever have to say, I was fortunate to grow up in a home free of violence and abuse. Every child has that right. And I know not every child in Nunavut has it, and I had that privilege of it.
Can I hold you there for a second? You're speaking from your heart. I don't want to miss anything. My little clock says we got to go to break. Beautiful. We'll be right back, guys, with Mumilaaq Qaqqaq. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Future Prospects with Mumilaaq Qaqqaq. Mumilaaq. I'm touched. I'm really touched. I don't want to take a minute away from this segment because sometimes it's really hard for me to, but you touched upon privilege and you broke it down so well. Through this segment, we're going to show pictures of the conditions within Nunavut. But I want you to continue of subject of abuse. If you can continue on that, please. I had to stop you there, but if you can just please educate our viewers on why you are in the position you are in, fighting for justice.
I think the normal, or what has become normal in Nunavut, is not something that you would see in a lot of other places in Canada. And our normal is burying more people due to suicide than friends' funerals you go to when you grow up. Normal is going to school because that's your safe place to grieve over your friend that just passed by suicide. Normal, unfortunately, is abuse and violence in all different ways, shapes, and forms because of the turmoil caused by the federal institution, the RCMP institution, and residential schools. What that has created is intergenerational trauma and a lack of knowledge in a number of things, whether that's relationships, whether that's how to be in a family, how to take care of a home, how to support community. There is such an immense breakdown and such a complexity in it that we oftentimes didn't even realize the amounts of different types of abuse that were being experienced directly or indirectly within the home. So as I grew up, I knew that certain things were going on around me, and I knew that certain friends and classmates and peers were going through certain things. But at the time, it didn't seem like such a huge deal because it was happening so much, and it seemed to happen in almost a normal way. And it took a while to realize that a lot of things about growing up in Nunavut and growing up in Baker Lake and being Inuk and being in, I was born in 1993. In all that time, it took 20 years before I realized there's something really messed up going on here. And that's the power of colonization and how it works, that it develops these immense forms of abuse that are so powerful that sometimes you don't even realize the immense amount of impacts it has on not just an individual, but a family, but a household, but a community. And the levels that we see that turmoil within our communities is something that isn't normal on any scale. So when I say I'm coming from a place of privilege, I also want to point out that it's also not a choice for people. We do not choose to be born with whatever color of skin. So when we talk about white privilege, we're not saying it's your fault for being white. We're saying that you hold a completely different kind of way that you walk through the world. And for some reason, we're scared of having those conversations. Now, I'm getting a little bit off track, but when there is so much turmoil and abuse that it's happening, it's incredibly difficult to feel that it's possible to find where you break the cycle. It's possible to find where is the issue. And ultimately, the issue has always been at the top, has always been at the national level, has always been from the federal institution, from external forces that in no way, shape, or form have ever respected to the extent Inuit life to the extent that it needs to be. And now we're seeing the consequences of that, which is suicide and violence and abuse at crazy numbers that wouldn't be normal anywhere else. But because we're brown and we have this ugly history, for some reason it continues to be okay throughout the country. So I'm trying to educate people on that and see that my message is not look at all the people that need help. It's look at the situation that we've been put into, and that we just deserve the rights and the help that anyone else would get that has been through what we have.
That's right, hon. Don't ever apologize on future prospects if you go off the grid a little bit. Don't ever. This is a conversation like if you and I were sitting down having a coffee at Starbucks. Don't ever, ever go off the grid. You're talking from your heart. And these conversations have to be continued, backed up with action. You, looking at your story, I was doing some research there. You took some time off. I think you went up, you returned back just to educate yourself on what you've seen. This is important, Mumilaaq, for you to share with the viewers what you've seen when you went there, the conditions. Because people just hear, some might research, but hearing it from the individual that is fighting for it, been there and knows what's going on. What have you seen, the conditions there, please?
When I went, I had decided to do what myself and my office is called a housing tour. And before COVID, we had wanted to get to most, if not all, the communities within the first year. I know that in the territory, things are very complex, and policy and procedure can get really messy. And ultimately, who I'm fighting for are the people on the ground. And I knew that in order for me to do that to the best of my ability, I needed to go talk to the people on the ground. By far, housing, if I put all my messages and comments and everything that comes through my office together, altogether, housing is by far something that is very, very, if not number one on the list for a lot of people in Nunavut. So, and I also knew that I didn't want to go in it following any kind of policy procedure, any kind of governing bodies of any sort, because I represent, and I'm here to advocate for Nunavut people in the homes, not necessarily people making decisions about them.
Okay.
I had suspected, what I had suspected was what I found to be true. So Nunavut is split into 3 regions, and each region differs with a different health care system in the south.
Right.
A lot of the time Nunavut is left out of discussions or given I need a new phrase for less than bare minimum. Even more so, I find that the Qaqimmiut region, which is the far western region, is even more so neglected.
Wow.
And so that's exactly what I saw. So each community, I spent about 2 or 3 nights, depending on the flight schedule. It was really crazy trying to travel during COVID. I went to 8 communities, 3 communities I traveled by myself, and then 5 communities I traveled with one of my staff. And as I suspected, so each community 2 or 3 nights, and I would beforehand, a few days before, just say, anyone that wants to meet with me, I'd love to come and talk to you about your home. So I go in and I do kind of a basic survey.
Right.
What I found immediately was I wish I thought about it more and had prepped more health questions. So I would typically walk into somebody's home for about 10, 15 minutes was kind of the start. They'd easily turn into half-hour, 40-minute visits. Just the immense amount of structural mold, everything, I'm trying to record the mold, what has frozen in the winter, what has shifted to cause the windows to break, and just so all these different things. And I'm trying to think to myself, okay, does this make sense? I am a member of parliament I'm finding this information. So I kind of had to regroup constantly and figure, okay, what is the actual, and really what it came down to was meeting with people and not necessarily I would take this information, which yes, was valuable.
Right.
But what I got from those was exactly how the experience of having no housing or having no option in housing was directly impacting health end lives of individuals.
Right.
With such a lack of housing, there were people who say were in a 2-bedroom place with 10 other people, but because they already had a home, they weren't as high on the priority list, even though they might have 4 kids and they're living with another family.
That's right.
Think about preteens not ever having their own bedroom to grow up in, to have privacy in. And I knew these kinds of things were going to come up, but what I didn't realize was how completely and truly impactful it could be on people from, I've talked a lot about violence and suicide and those kinds of things. And could you imagine you're 11 and I've heard this story, your 11-year-old hanging themselves and you have to stay in that home. You don't have that option. You don't have, there are so many stories, and all these stories had been, I could all point them back to a lack of housing. I had heard stories, and so this young man or this child had been living in a very much overcrowded home with some clear issues going on, and those kinds of things going back to the turmoil and abuse and all those kinds of things. That wasn't my goal. My goal was to say, look at how the actual housing is feeding into all these things.
That's right.
Not that there is violence and death here, but look at, because of a lack of space, it is increasing all of it.
Frustrated.
Absolutely. I had heard a mom who lost their 13-year-old who had disabilities to the foster care system, who was taken out of the territory because her home was deemed unfit. She had no other option. There was no other place for her to go for her child. I've heard of stories where individuals, it's so horrific to walk into a home where you smell the mold and within like 5-10 minutes you're sneezing, and you go into their bathroom and it's just covered in black spots. I'm like, you showered 2 feet from here.
Mumilaaq, we got to go to break. Yeah. We're going to come back and continue, guys. Listen, guys. Okay, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Future Prospects, guys, with Member of Parliament, Mumilaaq Qaqqaq. Wow. All I can say is wow. They are blessed to have you running. They're blessed to have you being the voice for those people and for the voice of what needs to be done, my love. We talked off camera and you covered the housing and you covered the youth, but you said, I asked you, what is it that you'd like to cover? So I got my notes, but you also have your agenda. Complex housing. Go for it.
I think a lot of what people don't understand just in general is the assumptions and the stereotypes that come attached with being Indigenous or coming from the North. A lot of those kinds of ideations that I like the Family Guy meme where he's got like the skin card and it's got the colors, and the darker you get, the more dangerous you are.
Yes.
Those are the kinds of things I think of. But in the Canadian history between the federal government and Inuit, and look at the federal government and Indigenous peoples as a whole, it's never been good. It's never been respectful. It's never been fulfilled. All those obligations have always had hope on one side from Indigenous peoples that they would be fulfilled, and always a letdown from the white colonizer side that they never are. A lot of the things that I've been saying lately are quite frankly, what is happening in the House of Commons are a bunch of white people who will never, ever have to comprehend what it is like to experience life as someone who isn't white, because they will never have to experience things like, we all have some sort of plan if we get pulled over by RCMP. We all know exactly how we're going to react as either a brown or a black individual. We all have an idea of how we're going to interact with the healthcare system, with the education system. How we prepare for a job interview is completely different. And these white, mostly men, are never ever going to have to understand what that's like to walk through life, and have to, the key part is have to walk through life like that. So now all of these individuals who, and oftentimes don't even know the basic differences between the North and South, are all making these big decisions that are impacting groups of people by the thousands. The complexities, though, go back in history and have been there for, although a short amount of time, a very pack-a-punched amount of time. And what I mean by that is that Inuit experienced many harsh things in a few short decades. Everything from the white coat ban, to dog slaughters, to forced relocation into communities, to residential school, to TB treatment, and the list just keeps going on. What we've never talked about and discussed is the evolution of that history and the complexity of that. Right. Inuit, when they were forced into communities, you will see most often is the RCMP building, the health center building, and a government building with igloos or tents around it. Inuit, right off the bat, were not given housing, even though they were forced to live in a place where they wouldn't have camped during that time of year anyways. And now their dogs are being killed, so they have no transportation to leave the community. There's government incentives being put in place so that it makes it near impossible for Inuit not to rely on the government for food, shelter. So right from the beginning, there is this progress, there's this evolution, if you will, of more and more intense oppressive systems being put in place in the North. So when we look at housing and say, where do we break these cycles and how do we fix this? Because there are so many things that we have talked about: trauma, intergenerational trauma, abuse, what's happened in communities, that history, the lack of resources now. What we need to understand is that history has put us in a space that has left too many people so hopeless that unnecessary amounts of people are choosing to take their own life. That does not make sense in any Canadian community, province, territory, on any Canadian grounds, anywhere, in any time between from when I was born until now. Right. But what we are seeing is exactly that. And it's not, we can't just expect an entire, and these Inuit, we are an entire group of tens of thousands of people that share similar language, culture, and tradition, right, who have gone through such immense amount of injustices trying to reclaim our identity. And we can't get the basics in food, shelter, and water. How can you expect anyone to fulfill and have quality of life and to go out and contribute to the world if they don't have a safe place to sleep in? How does it make sense to not give somebody a safe place to sleep in when you just completely destroyed not only the lives, but the potential lives of kids that even aren't born yet?
So Mumilaaq, when we were talking off camera, when we did the pre-interview, the reason why I'm looking off is I'm looking at the clock. What would help the situation move it? Because it's a huge mountain we're climbing. You're climbing right now, and I'm with you right alongside you, okay? But education, would you think the lack of education, why, if it be the government or just Canada on a whole, within that part, the forgotten side, would that be something that we can do? What do you think about that? Like, we talked about the education. So If you can give us a feedback on that, please. Your thoughts.
I'd asked somebody that was interviewing me a couple weeks ago, I said, who does it benefit that we miss out on that Canadian history, that it's not something that's formal and taught, that's standardized, and that is something that's common? And they're like, no one. And I said, no, it benefits everybody making money, and it benefits everybody with some kind of power. It fulfills that power imbalance that ensures that we continue to see brown and black people killed or in devastating situations that shouldn't even be. So I think that, you know, if we take a step back and say, what is the goal here? What are we trying to do? All we're trying to do is create more connection and create more awareness to make sure there's less division, because more often than not, we have commonalities. And I think what people really, really, really need to learn is that if you don't agree with it and it's not your deal, but it's not affecting your life directly, keep it to yourself. Go stand over there, and you want to have a crappy opinion, go for it, but have it over there and out of my face. I think that's a huge thing. Not just that. When we talk about awareness and education, I think what really we also need to talk about is being able to say that's not only incorrect, but wrong, dangerous, stupid sometimes, quite frankly.
Yes.
And we need to be able to say those things as well, because it is not normal to think that because someone is brown or black that they don't deserve the same opportunities as you.
That's right. And what you're fighting for every single day. So now I'm going to ask you, do you have faith in the system? This is a tough one. This is something that you're seeing.
It's not a
Why
tough
don't
one.
you have faith? Why? You're going to the House of Commons. We had a video. You opened up the show when you were addressing them, and you were talking from your heart. When you stand there, how do you feel? Do you feel like any hope? How do you feel? Because you're speaking to young people now that's going to advocate and will stand up for you. Why is it? So talk from a leader. That's what I'm trying to get to. That.
I have faith in people in the system. I don't have faith in the system.
Okay.
The system doesn't work clearly. It never has, or at least from my view, my standpoint. I mean, it might work for, people making more than $500,000 a year or whatever, or somebody working at the top, in the high chairs for the big corporations. That might be good for them. But I think what we need to come back to is a connection and an awareness, but also an understanding of how we can talk to one another better.
Right. But how can we do that now, Mumilaaq? Where can we start? I always think there's a problem, but where is the solution? Is it in education? Is it with youth? Is it by forming different types of curriculum, classes, something where even the government can be more? They're saying they're seeing this. So
that's
you know
the
what
frustrating
I mean?
part. Right. I see what you're getting at.
Right.
So that's one of the frustrating things about the federal government. When we watch Trudeau take a knee during a protest, are you kidding me? Stand up, bro, and change some stuff, because you have the power to say you have the power federally, nationally, to say provinces and territories need to teach Canadian history, need to make that part an awareness and a part of the curriculum. There's the power to do that. There's not the willingness there because it doesn't benefit them. How would it benefit the federal government to say, look at what we've done to all these people for this long and what we continue to do? So I believe what I would love, and it starts with people like me, and it starts with NDP. It starts with, I have all my colleagues. We are the party that wants to make change for individuals.
Right.
And in that, I think there's there's true power in creating revolution when you have individuals that not just believe in it, but then you have people in those positions.
Right.
So my thing is always, watch out, because there's going to be a lot more that look like me, a lot more louder than me, and there's only going to be more of us. So I think that that's something as well that we need to understand and realize, that we all have a right to be here. We all have a right to that spot.
Well, we live in a world, so if we're living in it, we have a right to do what we have to do. Mm-hmm. On that note, we'll be right back, guys, with Mumilaaq Qaqqaq. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Future Prospects with Member of Parliament, Mumilaaq Qaqqaq. My love, you are a tower of strength. And I say this to all of my guests because whoever I have on are people that I respect dearly. We can talk until the cows come home, Mumilaaq. But what is it going to take? I know there is, and we shared this off camera, we had a good little conversation. On one side, they don't want to talk, so they hold back. You want to bring that, as well as what you're trying to do, together. What is it? How does that feel? And what is it going to take? Because there's got to be a breaking barrier somewhere.
I think in what's happened in such a short amount of time for the territory, there's a lot of sometimes division or confusion. And what I really realized among a amount of other things during the housing tour was that the federal government not providing this basic human right that all Inuit should have has in turn created on the ground tension, frustration. I heard a lot of arguments with whoever it may have been, whether that involved the housing themselves or with tenants or with who, and it's not something that is unknown. What was so frustrating in that is that this disruptiveness that happens is simply because a lack of something that should already be there, that obligation piece, that piece where there is a Nunavut land claims agreement, there is a history, there is an obligation that the federal government should be fulfilling, and they never have. And for whatever reason, those standards to fulfill these kinds of items related to majority Indigenous peoples is down here instead of up here. I think in terms of, I would love people to realize that they have such power in themselves, that there is such opportunity. I have really just been trying to show people I am just like everyone else. I just happen to have this platform and I want to use it to the best of my ability. But there is possibility in organizing and being able to see change. We saw it in Black Lives Matter across the globe. We saw things change. What I don't understand is why we kind of have to get to this tipping scale of things are so bad before we see change, instead of why can't we just see that gradual improvement over time. I think it is there, just not at the scope anyone would like to see, and of course not as big and fast. And we all want to see things happen a lot more quickly than they do. I think what people should start really focusing on is what is valuable in life, and the value of life is that we have one another, we have ourselves, we have our families, we have community, and that not everybody has the opportunities that everybody should all be entitled to.
That's right.
And that all we're trying to do is explain the inequalities and the history behind it. We're not trying to say here's an injustice and simply think that we are telling you the truth. But we're also, why is it up to us to spend all our time educating you on our history and our, and that's the other thing. It's not our history, it's Canadian history.
That's right.
So even how we talk about it, like there's so many things that need to change, and we're starting to have these conversations and they're happening, but ultimately there's power in individuals, and there's power to be able to organize and make change. What I hope people start to decide to determine for themselves is what they want to create as normal, because it's not normal for any cashier at Loblaws to be worried about what's going to happen in their future when the CEO of Loblaws isn't worried about that.
That's right.
All these huge, there's so many of these kinds of examples where clearly sharing the wealth is sharing the health, and that's not happening. And because the federal government is allowing the wealth to stay at the top and it's not being shared, we're seeing people struggle in an immense amount of ways, and ultimately people dying because of it. And
when you look, sorry, go ahead.
I think that we like to think of this idea in a perfect world, but we can at least work towards making a better one and a more equal one. And we can work towards this, like redistributing those power balances, because the power imbalances are so immense. And we need to be willing to have these kinds of conversations, especially I would say those that are privileged enough to not worry about food, water, and shelter.
And life and living to see tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
I want to jump on something right now before I miss out on it, because this show is Future Prospects. And it's inspiring youth to stand up, to share their stories of significance, but most importantly, you are a mentor, you are a role model for them. If it be Simcoe County, GTA, the world. When you look at young people today, you say people can create change, but the future generations, what is your message to them, Mumilaaq?
In this moment, I miss you guys. Seriously, this is going to be so bad. I am so tired of working with older people that do not have the willingness to be more open-minded. I miss youth so much. And I miss people like me. I miss people my age. I am youth. I miss hanging out with like-minded individuals.
Right.
We need your creativity and your ideas and your openness, and just your willingness to accept other people is oftentimes beyond what many of the individuals I have to interact with can comprehend. And it's so open and full of love and so encouraging all the time. And I miss you all. But with that being said, it's so important that ultimately, and what I struggle with most often is my own self, and realizing that a lot of my life is making sure that I have balance in it too, that I make sure I'm mentally balanced, I'm doing enough physical exercise, I'm eating right, and I'm taking care of myself in whatever way that looks like for me, that looks like counseling for me. And that doesn't look like counseling for everyone. Taking care of your mental health is just having an emotional, healthy outlet to be expressive.
What's yours? What's yours, pretty girl?
I don't know. People keep asking me, like, what do you do in your spare time? I'm like, I don't know, work.
Oh, you kidding me?
Work. No, lately I've been trying to, I think I'll dive back a little bit here into, I used to sew So a couple months ago, I found a really old XXL leather jacket. I took the arms off and the insides out, and I cut it up a bit, and I just need to make a couple tweaks. But if I mess it up, that might not work out well. So I'm just waiting for a time. I'm feeling it, and
Yes.
So
That's
getting
right.
back a little bit more into just fashion. I like sewing. I think it's important to have some sort of self-care and self-love. For some ladies, I shouldn't even say lady, for some people that's makeup. For me, I have no patience, but I've been trying really hard to every day just kind of look at my hair, and I braid my hair and think about taking care of my hair and things like that. I think it's so important to find ways that make sense for you and just make you happy. And if people are worried about that, let them be. What does RuPaul say? What anybody thinks about me is none of my business. Like, don't even worry about it. Don't even worry about it. Do your thing. Makes you happy. That's great. And as long as you're not bothering anyone else, as long as you're not contributing in a negative way, that's fine. And I think that people need to realize that contributing and being supportive doesn't mean like you have to go run for a member of parliament or show up to every single rally or go to every single, like, that's not what I mean. I think what we also need to stress is mental health looks different for you. It looks different for me, and that's perfectly fine. It just needs to work in a way that works for you. I think also what self-love looks like. We need to talk about it in whatever way makes sense for us and whatever we enjoy. And if other people are going to be worried about that, it's not even worth the time. It's not even worth the effort. And that's fine. But I know it's sometimes your biggest critic is you. So it's just practice. I tell myself every day I'm awesome because I am, but also because I have to remind myself. So it's practice.
Wow. I was going to ask you that, and you beat me to the punch. Moving forward, hon, I know you've got a heavy agenda, but moving forward in a new year, and we're coming to the end of the show, and we've only got a minute and a couple of seconds. What are you seeing? What would you like to see? A message to you. I want you to send a message out to the viewers.
I'd like to see an increase in awareness of the realities of Nunavut and the relationship between the federal government and Inuit. And I'd like to see more youth involvement and more hope and more people getting involved and more people fighting for their rights, because we have them and we're entitled to them and we deserve them.
Well, if I ask you through your assistant to come back and I invite some youth on that are championing, literally fighting for you right now, to get some ideas together, will you do it?
Yes, let's do it.
Let's do it, girl. Let's get the youth involved and rock this, because like anybody that comes on the show, I don't mess around. Thank you from my heart, sweetheart.
Thank you are so much,
blessing.
Joy.
Give me the heart.
Fun.
You're
so
welcome.
Much fun.
All right. Awesome. Give me the heart. Love you, girl. Love you. Bye.
Joy. Bye.